Today we're gonna be remaking the remake of Resident Evil 4, but before that let's take a history class. So Resident Evil 4 was first released in 2005, then Capcom decided to remaster the textures in 2014. Now we have an official remake scheduled for March the 24th. Not only that, but an individual called Sigma, aka me, made a remake of Capcom's Remake, or at least I tried. So ladies and gentlemen, here's what you've clicked for: Resident Evil 4 Remake of the Remake. In order to understand the whole story, you have to know my relationship to Leon. As some of you might know, we both studied in the same school. One day, it was lunchtime, and after Leon finished his meal, he quickly stood up and rushed to, well, somewhere. I remember finding that weird, and that's why I decided to follow him, because you never know. After all, he's my friend. I saw him entering the water cycle, and I immediately understood the situation. I mean, we all know what the school cafeteria food does to your stomach. I waited for a while, but moments turned into minutes, and then out of nowhere, I heard Leon screaming. I rushed inside and saw him pointing at the toilet. I was really confused and curious, but I paid no attention, and a few months later, he told me what really happened that day. He said while he was sitting on the toilet comfortably, he felt something. Without giving it much thought, he stood up and looked at the toilet, and that's when it hit him. Unity engine was there, floating on the water. We still don't know why Unity was there, but at least I know one thing. Unity was in the place it belonged to, the toilet. It's a little embarrassing that I made up this story just to shit on Unity. No pun intended. Usually when I start working on projects, I start with the character controller, which lets you control the character. I've done that many times, so it wasn't an issue. The issue is that I don't have the time or the money to pay a 3D artist to make Leon Kennedy model. So I stole Leon. So I secretly took Leon. So I borrowed Leon. So I asked Capcom. So I made a bot to steal Leon's. Okay, so I made Leon Kennedy's model from scratch. Is that what you want me to say, Capcom? I obviously ended up taking Leon from Resident Evil 2 Remake, which I found online. Please Capcom, just let me off the hook. This time. I had very little amount of time, and that's why I deleted the skeleton it came with instead of learning to use it. Then imported the model into Blender and quickly re-rigged it, which was surprisingly fast. I also downloaded Mixamo animations to cut down time. Thankfully, I didn't need many animations. I had to create the iconic Leon stand idle animation by mixing multiple animations and editing them out. Same thing for the aiming animation and the walking animation. Now that I think about it, I actually edited all animations. Luckily, it turned out pretty decently. Moving on to programming in Unreal Engine 5. This part was straightforward. I literally copied most of the code from my old game called Outside and pasted it onto the new game. And speaking about my game Outside, which we named after the game Inside as a joke, you can play it for free from the link in the description. Of course, the code I copied didn't work immediately, so I did a bit of editing. That bit took like 4 days. And moving on to materials. This project taught me lots of things. Also, I learned to use decals, which to put simply is just a virtual stamp to add details to your world. Things like cracks on a wall or blood or any variation you'd see on flat surfaces. I love decals, but unfortunately it was pretty limited. But I hope I'm wrong. Let's talk now about level design. This part is pretty nightmarish to me as I have little to zero experience with it. Yes, I do 3D art, but almost never designed a level, let alone use pre-made assets. There is nothing wrong with using them, it's just I'm not used to using them. I broke out of my shell and decided to learn a bit of level design. I didn't have to make everything perfect, so I opted to use fog to hide my imperfections. In the original game, they had some fog, so I'd say I was on the right track. And speaking of the original game, I actually collected some references before making the level. Here is what I got. My goal was a forest/woods environment, as that is easier to replicate quickly than indoor scenes, since it's pretty difficult to find Resident Evil 4 specific assets. Another reason I went with outdoor scene is because of lighting. With outdoor scenes, you generally use a single light source like sun to illuminate the environment, compared to an indoor scene which requires multiple lights and baking. And speaking of baking, I actually skipped that part since I used Lumen Global Illumination in Unreal 5. For vegetation, I used the foliage tool that any engine would have. One thing to keep in mind is that trees don't follow the normal of the terrain, so make sure to disable that for them. Although I do think I did a good job with remaking the remake of Resident Evil 4, I still think I failed at doing so. I mean, come on, there are no enemies, no muzzle flash when shooting, the level is half-assed and incomplete, too many unfinished things. Anyways, you guys might be wondering, how much time would it take to actually recreate the full Resident Evil 4 remake? And the answer is simple, I don't know. I think I can confidently say that you can probably just make the recent demo in 5 years? Maybe less, I don't know. If you liked what I did in this video and you want to learn how, I just wanted to let you know that I have a completely free beginner Blender course for game developers that I'll upload soon. You'll learn modeling, animation, rigging, UV, texturing, and many more. So you should probably subscribe until then.